تكشف إلا بكتابك حين ترى الله ما أحراك بهذا أن يكبر قدرك عند الله هل لك سر عند الله بينك أنت وبين الله هل لك صدقات تخفى لا يعلمها إلا الله قصص لا تكشف إلا بكتابك حين ترى الله ما أحراك بهذا أن يكبر قدرك عند الله هل لك سر عند الله بينك أنت وبين الله هل لك صدقات تخفى لا يعلمها إلا الله هل لك سر عند الله بينك أنت وبين الله هل لك صدقات تخفى لا يعلمها إلا الله قصص لا تكشف إلا بكتابك حين ترى الله
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. It's actually past our time. But inshallah, today, inshallah, be discussing about. I'm not going to be necessarily giving the lecture, but I'd really like to hear your different opinions regarding this matter. And of course, when we're looking at the topic abuse or discipline, of course, right now, we're getting a lot of different talk and different counselors, therapists, and of course, different stories. So we're not only talking about one side, but we're also seeing, yes, indeed, even parents sometimes probably abusing, but we're going to talk about where, your different opinions. So the question is, when we're looking at, is it parents abusing their position, or are therapists, are they right in calling it parent abuse? And of course, or are therapists really going too far and in their definition for abuse? And of course, what is the basis for psychology in defining abuse? So when, for example, we would say parent abuse, what do we actually mean by that? What does it really mean when lots of therapists are saying that, hey, it's parent abuse? And right now it's becoming the common thing in where everyone and most therapists are discussing parent abuse, parents as abusing, and of course making parents become these devils that are somehow taking advantage of their children's needs and the youth, and they're trying to enforce their ideas on them. And the victims are the children, and they're the ones that are thinking that they're doing the right thing, but in reality, the children are the victims. And right now we're getting more and more mental illness because of the parents. Is that really true? And are counselors or therapists really qualified to advise Muslim youth? Or are they not any different because they're trained by Western therapists? So what are you going to get? You're going to get Muslim in on the outside, but the reality is they were trained by non-Muslim therapists. So their definitions are ethical and of course philosophical, and therefore not really any different from non-Muslim counselors. Is that really true or not? And how influenced are the counselors with Western liberal definitions of parenting, abuse, and other ethical terms? Are they really influenced, or no? This doesn't necessarily need lots of qualification in Islamic studies. We generally know the general legal maxims in Islamic studies, so we don't necessarily need muftis and mujtahids to guide the Muslim counselors and therapists, because, hey, after all, they do know the basics of Islam, so you don't necessarily need them to be so highly qualified. qualified in Islamic studies. It's enough for them to know the basics, and they'll be able to lead the way to help Muslim patients actually find the right stance on dealing with quote unquote parent abuse, and they're qualified to help them make the decisions in life, and therefore they would be the ones to turn to in order to help them. After all, if you're not going to allow the Muslim counselors actually help the Muslim patients, they're basically going to go off and they're going to seek counseling elsewhere. And it's most likely, if you're not telling them to go to Muslim counselors, and if you're not giving the credibility for the Muslim counselors, even if they're not probably the best in their Islamic qualification, but if you don't let the Muslim youth go to them, they're eventually going to go to non-Muslims, and then you're going into a bigger evil and a more evil thing. So if you're going to lose the credibility and you're going to doubt the credibility of Muslim counselors, you're basically going into an even more dangerous choice. Is that really true or not? And what is going on? And of course, the questions are parents really taking advantage of their positions and going beyond their parenting boundaries, and of course, into abuse? Or the children becoming too far off in mannerism and life experiences that it's putting them in danger? What really is the right thing, and what is it necessarily one either or is it probably a piece of both? How do we actually answer and talk about this? And I would really like to hear your thoughts. What should the counselor stance be when parents are really abusing their positions? Should they be reconciliating between the parents and the children, or support the youth, or support the parent, or probably take a neutral stance? What if you can't really take a neutral stance in where the parent is insisting, for example, on one thing, and the child, you know very well, is going to be heading into a different direction? Should you tell the parent, and how should you deal with this? I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Of course, there's really a lot to discuss. I'd be happy to listen to everyone's opinion. I have my own stance. I have my own position. I'm a parent. And definitely I see a lot of people, but I don't necessarily want to right now say my opinion. And I would really like to hear your opinion on this. Please educate me. Please tell me and tell us what we're missing out. How do we see the picture, and what could we understand about this? I'd really like to hear what everyone else is saying. So if we would start, if anybody would like to answer some of the questions, I don't mind. Anybody can hop in and actually speak, and it would be helpful just so that we could organize the talk in where you could probably give me like a hand up or something, so we could discuss it together, or at least unmute. That way we won't have too many people jumping at the same time on the microphone. So that would be helpful. It is being recorded, so just to let you know, it is being recorded. It's live on YouTube as well. You can actually chat on YouTube as well. You can comment on here. You can go on the microphone and educate us, or tell us what you think, or answer the questions. There is going to be a poll. I will be putting it up there. Would really like to have you. So let's launch a poll, and oh, sorry, I put in the wrong poll. So I'll put in the right poll in just a bit, inshallah. And I would really like to hear your thoughts on this. So here we go. I'm going to be putting up a poll. The poll says, are counselors and therapists really qualified to advise Muslim youth? The second question says, how influenced are the counselors with Western liberal definitions of parenting, abuse, and ethical terms? And of course, there was actually an untitled question that was supposed to be, don't mind that one. That was on my end, something wrong on my end. I would really like to hear your thoughts. So let's go for the first question. All right. Abuse. Who defines abuse? And what is the basis for psychology in defining abuse? Are counselors and therapists really qualified to advise Muslim youth? And how influenced are the counselors with Western liberal definitions of parenting abuse and other ethical terms? You want to, on the other side, you also want to keep note of the question, if you want to say that Muslim counselors are really influenced by Western liberal definitions, you also want to ask your question, should we discredit these counselors and end up with Muslim students actually end up going to non-Muslim counselors? You want to keep that in mind. You don't want to just answer one side and forget that, hey, if you want to discredit this person, this Muslim counselor right there, they're probably going to end up going on the other type of, let's say, to the other type of non-Muslim counselors, and then you're leaving one problem, you're going to a probably even more dangerous problem. I'll tell you a story. I had a parent, their daughter actually goes to a Muslim school, without mentioning any names. This Muslim school was indeed, I know the Muslim school, they're doing an excellent job. The student happened to learn, let's just say, inappropriate things from the Muslim students that are in that Muslim school. The girl was complaining about anxiety and different things. So the parent did their job and they actually took them to a Muslim counselor. The girl didn't like, she's only 13 or 12 years old, somewhere around there. The girl wasn't so happy with the Muslim counselor and said and insisted that she wanted to go to a non-Muslim counselor. And indeed, the parents just wanted the healing for their child, so they took her to a non-Muslim counselor. The non-Muslim counselor diagnosed that she was having issues of dysphoria, and you guys know what I'm talking about, and then suggested that she needed to actually get and start on those injections. You guys know what I'm talking about. So indeed, the parent was notified. The parent insisted that no, this is not going to happen, and we don't allow this. This is not appropriate in our religion, and etc. But the hospital told them that they have to not go, that they have to somehow respect her wishes, and that this is real. And in the end, the daughter ended up going to these let's just call them counseling areas that said that they'll give her the support in order to go on such quote unquote treatment. The father called and he asked me what he thinks, what I think he should be doing. So I said, well, I know a Muslim pediatrician. She will be more qualified than me in talking to her about the dangers of such injections and etc. And I called her up, and she's a Muslim pediatrician, and she said, sorry, I can't actually get involved in this because I'm worried that my license will be taken away. And the father ended up really with no choice, because not even a Muslim pediatrician or a Muslim counselor is right now daring to speak up against or even to help this girl make the right choices. And right now, of course, this is called abuse. This is called parent abuse, according to the different areas of so-called counseling. So this is just an example. Of course, it doesn't always have to go that direction. I'll put example number 2. A parent comes to me and she said she was actually crying really hard. And the daughter, she gets to know, she meets this non-Muslim man, and this non-Muslim man she gets in love with. And of course, she went to Muslim counselors, and the Muslim counselors told her that, hey, you can get married to him, but on one condition, that he would make his shahada. So he goes to different imams, and the imams were saying, well, he can make the shahada, but we can clearly see that this person is not serious about his Islam. This man was questioned on what is shahada, what does he know about Islam. Clearly he did not know anything. So the girl insisted that no, this is the man that I'm going to get married to. He's not Muslim, but yeah, he's going to be Muslim. and and eventually the parents, they insist that no, this is all fake, you're being abused here, we're not going to let this go through. And the Muslim counselors, they basically tell her that, hey, you don't need a wali, you don't need your parents on this, go and get married without a wali, because all you need to say is say that your parents are rejecting because he happens to be from a different tribe. When the parents were confronted, they said this has nothing to do with tribalism and our child is manipulating the whole story. This person is not Muslim. And that's our whole reason for rejecting the marriage. This person is not serious about their Islam. This person does not even have a good job, does not is not qualified to be a husband for our daughter. Eventually, the girl runs away and actually gets married to this man. Muslim counselors were notified. Why did you get this? Why did you actually advise this? They said, well, we were able to see the whole story going that direction. So we wanted at least to have a Muslim shell to it. Did they do the right thing? What happened? It doesn't mean that I disagree or agree with everything. So I would really like to hear your thoughts on this. So who defines abuse? What is the definition? Are counselors and therapists really qualified? Please raise your hands to get, because I don't want to end up, making this as a lecture. I have a lot of different stances on this, but I'm not going to share it now. Are parents really taking advantage of their position, or are children really too far off in mannerism and life experiences, and that's putting them in danger? I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Let's see. Asma Mansour. Asma Mansour, go ahead, my dear. Oops, Asma Mansour, I unmuted you and then I muted you again. Sorry about that. Unmute yourself. Go ahead. Asma, go ahead. We should be able to hear you if you're
Can you hear me
unmute.
now?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead, my dear.
Okay, so I think that if the counselor or the therapist doesn't go against like Islamic values, then I don't think there's anything wrong, because they are quite qualified from a secular sense and just from like a scientific sense. But if what they have to advise goes against what the youth believe in generally, then I think it's 100% better for you to go to a Muslim that is in line with your beliefs, because that can be very detrimental. Like I know um, Dr. Rania, she does like training for even non-Muslim counselors on how to deal with Muslims. So I think if the counselor has a background in that, or like doesn't impose non-Islamic views, then it's okay. Can
So,
actually be beneficial.
right. So here's a question, Asma. If we want to say that Muslim counselors are more qualified, all right? So definitely they have some background on Islam, but are they necessarily more qualified in a sense to actually make life decisions and even give, because it really is, intertwined, where you're giving a fatwa here, you're telling a child, hey, it's better for you to leave your parent, or stay out, or even leave that home, or this is a fatwa without them realizing that
I
they're
don't want
actually
to
giving a fatwa.
I don't want to say they're more qualified. I just said I hope that the counselor, in their advice, they don't even need to be Muslim. They could be non-Muslim, so long as they don't impose views or give advice that goes against the values of the Muslim. Then I think if they provide psychological support, I don't see what is wrong with that. I think it
So
all goes back down to having experience on how to deal with Muslims, really, and
so
try
here.
not to get into like stay in your lane kind of thing. Like if
Right,
you're
but here's the thing, Asmat. With counselors, like there is, in order to like stay well, keep your license. There's a it's like there's a book. It's like there's a book to follow in how you actually practice your counseling. So yes, that you are being told to um respect people's backgrounds, respect people's religions, etc. But there's somewhat like a book. That's why you would get the licensure. There's this book that you pretty much have to go back to in dealing with the cases on many situations.
I don't know. I think it helps for a person to be like qualified Islamically and in a and like secular studies, because then they know where to balance. Do you know? Like they know what I don't know. I don't have to explain it. I can't tell from my personal experience, but I've seen there's Muslim psychiatrists that they deal well with things like this because, as I said, I think they know how to stay in their lane.
So generally, you're saying Muslim therapists or Muslim psychiatrists slash psychologist and psychologists, because
Yeah.
they're two different fields. They one, we need them, which I would definitely agree with you on. Two, that they're a better option than non-Muslim counselors,
If
right?
they're not, if they're not like Muslims that have like very secular views, I'll say a person with Muslim values can be a better option than someone that's entirely like very liberal, for instance, and as a counselor.
Right, right. But just keep in mind that there are different things that would regulate, so-called regulate, even Muslim counselors on how they practice their counseling. In other words, there are a whole bunch of different epistemologies, different backgrounds, and how you actually practice your counseling, or you practice your whether it's therapy or counseling. And then you can't really go far off that book, because you are here mandated that this is what the practice should look like. So just to keep that in mind, I'd really like to hear Fatima Ba, what do you think?
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
So, based on the story, from what I gathered, I joined not too long ago, and I know there's a lot more to what you said, but what I caught from what you're saying, I think counselors, be it Muslim or not, they should have, there should be a line that I don't think they should cross, especially when it comes to some family ties, when the stories are everywhere. The mother, where the parents have their perspective, the children have their perspective, or mostly, for example, immigrant families, where the families have other values and the kids are born here, they have other values. And Islam, obviously, we know what Islam and the Sunnah says, but it does not mean some of these values should not be considered when making some of these decisions. And the counselors obviously would not have a privy to what those values are. So what would be, I guess, the fine line of doing what is right to Islam and also doing what is right to those values that are not the same to the parent and the child? And for those two to reconcile, or those three, including Islam, to reconcile. So I think counselors should not make a fatwa on certain situations when they know, when, especially when the child is then looking forward to an answer that suits them the most. And perhaps the counselor is also coming from that value system that the other family side is not coming from, but also does not really go against Islam. So I think there should be a fine line that counselors should not be crossing.
So Fatima, let me ask you this. Let's say
Yeah.
you were a counselor, all right? You see that the case that you have, the child was born in America, grew up in America, went to American schools. Well, surely then their reality, and in reality, they're more American than anything else. Father and mother are from Guinea, all right? Father and mother have their perspective. When you get married, you're going to get married from somebody that is Fulani, all right? Fulani is the better option. Hey, their men are more masculine. They can be better responsible and they can have a better job. Fulani men are better in their deen. Hey, we want to preserve our heritage. We want to preserve our language. And the daughter barely speaks Fulani, barely knows Fulani culture, and parents are insisting, no, you're going to get married from Guinea because we want to preserve our heritage. The daughter doesn't want to get married to somebody from Guinea because she's more American. That's where she grew up in. So you are a counselor right there. You're trying to talk to the parent. The parent is insisting that no, Fulani men are better. Fulani men, there are just a better option. You talk to the daughter, you tried to reconcile, but she would tell you, I went to Guinea. The men there, we don't even click. They don't even speak my language. They don't even have the same type of vision of what I want to have in life. So it's either going to be a man from Guinea or it's not going to be. It's either going to be a man from Guinea or probably a man from maybe a Somali, which, for somebody from Guinea, Somali, what are you talking about? That's going to be the last person on earth that I would accept that you would get married to. It's either going to be him or it's not going to be him. How am I going to reconciliate between a parent that's insisting that no, and a daughter that's insisting that I don't want somebody from Guinea? What do you say, Fatmata? What are you going to do? How am I going to reconciliate this?
So as a counselor, I think, first of all, I want to be sure that I'm really hearing from both the child and the parents, that is really what they're saying, that it's not something beyond what the counselor is hearing. But also, like that child, just like she was born here as a Guinean, let's say, there are also other boys who were born here, whose parents are Guineans, who consider themselves American or American Guinean, whatever you call it. So it doesn't mean that the fishes in that pool are as little as they are saying. Perhaps they're just, obviously, when you're infatuated in one person, you're only seeing that person and that becomes your universe. It doesn't mean there are no other objects in that universe. You just are not seeing them at that time because you can't see them, you don't want to see them. So I don't think a counselor should then say, you're right, according to Islam, it's your right, go ahead, do what you need to do, your parents are wrong. I'll just say, step back and think of your options that you have and see how you and your parent can reconcile, because you actually could have more options as you're currently seeing, and perhaps time can just resolve your situation. Don't rush in. I would say so.
But here's what happens. Most of the youth, especially girls, more than the boys, this is very common that I see it more in girls than boys. When they fall in love with something, that's all they want. They block out any other option. It becomes, it's either this or no, or no any other option. And she would insist that no, this is the right man for me and nothing but this. And they end up, if you don't give me this, many girls, if you don't give me this, they'll either go into severe anxiety and, of course, needing pills and all that, or probably thinking of option 2. That's it. I'm going to run away and get married to him and do it my way. So you see that this girl is going down that direction. It's either on pills, antidepressants, or she's going to run away. What am I going to do that? What am I going to do then? I'm trying to talk to the parents, but the parents are, it's either this way or no way.
Yeah, I think as a parent, when you raise your child with certain values for certain amount of time, you would think that they have learned something based off those values. Obviously, then the child goes to school here, the child is born here, they spend 8 hours in school and they have maybe 2 thoughts of the values that are different than yours. Maybe they only got 1 thought that's from you, the parents. Yes, it is very hard to reconcile. However, I still think the role of the counselor, who is the third party in or the fourth party in the relationship, should really be very, it's a slippery slope. So the counselor can really, it's easy for the counselor to make a mistake because that child is really looking for somebody to tell them, to give them acceptance of what they're doing, what they want to do that is the right thing. But does it make the parents wrong though? Does it make the parents wrong to say, you know what, we did not raise you up with these values and we will not accept these values from you? As you know, this is what we believe and this is how we've been doing things. This is what we taught you. So yes, if a child wants to go down taking pills and all of that, as the counselor, I would try my best to, try avoid that. But having the child do what's completely against the parents, is that the only solution to not having them take pills? Isn't there anything else? I don't know.
All right. All right. So I'd really like to hear other Fatmata, Jazakallah khairan, Fatmata. There's definitely a lot to say. It doesn't mean, I've got, inshallah, I'm going to make a different lecture, separate lecture. I really want to hear your thoughts on this as well. Can they redirect people to religious leaders? Here's Asma saying, can they redirect people to religious leaders? Well, I've got a number of different cases where they redirected people to religious leaders. But here's the thing. Religious leaders, not always. Fatmata, if you want to say something, you just raise your hand. That's okay. Unmute yourself. Religious leaders are accused of not always being, let's say, neutral, having their biases, and accused of being too ignorant about the psychological aspects and all the different situations. And of course, oftentimes accused of not being realistic in their suggestions. And of course, let me say, a lot of times the religious leaders are actually put as in place of mockery, which actually comes from the atheist, I would say, the atheist atmosphere that is trying to stereotype religious leaders as ignorant, as they don't know the reality, as backwards. They don't even speak the language. They're too far off in understanding psychology, too far off in understanding so many things. They're just so closed into their own world that they're actually not realizing a lot of different spectrums that they should be seen. So of course it comes with that. And of course, a lot of therapists would accuse that the Muslim religious leaders are oftentimes not aware of a lot of the different psychological dangers that, or even, let's say, the different routes that a lot of different hardships are actually a lot of different hardships, and where they're actually leading the Muslims or the Muslim youth. I would really like to hear other point of views on what you actually think about this. Please unmute yourselves. I would really love to hear your thoughts. Yes, I can be sometimes, putting out my thoughts, and once I start with my thoughts, trust me, I won't stop. So I would before I say my own thoughts, I would really like you to educate me on what am I missing off on? Are parents really taking advantage of their positions and going beyond their parenting boundaries to abuse? Abuse. There you go. I would really like to hear your thoughts. And of course, I'm going to start. Kaltoon, what do you think, Kaltoon? I know Kaltoon told me that she's just going to be listening, but I'd really like to hear. I'm going to call on some names. Rania, I see Samia. I would really like to hear your thoughts. Bisharo, Sadia, please, educate me. Tell me what we're missing off on and missing out on, and what we really need to know. Are we going too far in accusing therapists of being affected by the Western / liberal epistemologies or not? So I would really like somebody to, share their thoughts. If you don't go up, I'll start talking myself. And who wants to say something? So here's somebody else that said, there's a lot of trauma and lack of positive role models. There's lots of trauma and lack of positive role models. Is it lack of positive role models, or are the role models, or many role models, are we polishing? Is the media polishing certain role models and and demonizing other role models. In other words, when it comes to, and this is real, by the way, when I came across a rand when I was doing my master's, there were some agendas that were literally said in that way, where there's the agenda to demonize the Muslim scholars and what they were saying, and whenever they would, let's say, misquote or misuse something to make them seem as if they were backwards, ignorant, that they are somehow just unrealistic, and so forth. And of course, the role models, in religious role models, that of course every single area, there's media that's always playing a very important role in how it presents these role models. So it comes with it, where if it's a religious role model, let's put them in a place of mockery. If it's a role model that's probably, a singer, a dancer, or somebody, make them seem as if they were courageous, they were speaking their minds, they're very wise, they're very aware, they're a lot more educated than you think, and those become the role models. And of course, the image that these people are presented, it becomes like, hey, that you can't have Umar Sulaiman that is as smart, as funny, as what is the word that I could use, as cool as you would have, the different stars out there. So in order for any religious role model to appear like they're really good role models, they really have to make fool out of themselves to appear funny, to appear as if they were appealing to the youth. They have to live a certain, what is it called, a certain shell, a certain shape, and or else they will not make it to be good role models. And even when they become role models, they're scrutinized, in where they're expected not to go off the common, let's call it common, or the not the common, but there's this culture there. You have to embrace that culture. And what I mean by culture, the modern and postmodern, and of course liberal culture. And even when you speak of hellfire, you got to speak about it in a cute way, because you're going to seem as if you are somehow attacking, as if you are somehow you're being too harsh, and our youth right now cannot handle any type of harshness, not coming from parents and not coming from a da'iyah. So you have to be soft in the way you speak and say everything. After all, they're actually used to soft food, so make sure you don't give too much of a big chunk. All right, and then that becomes the attack on those role models. So the part about there's lots of trauma, trauma, many times I'm just wondering, but please answer and please help me understand this. When we speak of trauma, what are the different traumas that are affecting at least the Muslims that are growing in the US? is the parenting trauma. And I don't disagree that there definitely are things like trauma where there's probably a violence and severe violence involved, or there's probably different types of violence, whether it's psychological or even verbal or even physical abuse. There's definitely that, and definitely is within the Muslim community. There's no doubt about that. But are we here sometimes exaggerating trauma? I'm just asking, exaggerating trauma that even when the parents are actually subsidizing, they're doing all that they can, and then we're still calling it trauma. I'd really like to hear Samia. She rose her hand. I would really love to hear Samia. What do you have to say, Samia?
Assalamu alaikum.
What are you saying?
As what you said, there's no doubt that people experience trauma in their families, and parents can be abusive to some extent or another. But there definitely is a trend of people exaggerating, and basically things that aren't even, that we would have maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago would have considered just to be like, average, normal interactions, normal family dynamics, that now are considered to be very toxic and very abusive. And this isn't just a trend that's in the Muslim communities, but this is something that even in the non-Muslim families are noticing the same thing. And this just kind of reminds you of an article that I came across a few months ago. It was like an opinion piece in the New York Times, and they had suggested that it was like a third of Americans are reporting that they're estranged from their family members, and most of these cases are children being estranged from their adult parents. And then when they're asking the parents, well, what was it that caused this estrangement? The parents are saying, we recall a normal family dynamics, a typical childhood. We don't remember anything that even comes close to abuse. And then, so it seems that the idea of abuse and toxicity and trauma, it's just become so over encompassing. And it's like, now that they're talking about these things like microaggressions, like somebody can make a comment, and then this comment, maybe you would say it's insensitive, a little hurtful, but now this comment that's insensitive or hurtful is being equated with violence. Like this comment is an act of violence. So this idea that, like, this concept creep that, like, certain things that are, yeah, maybe insensitive or maybe a little hurtful, but your average person will get over it. But now it's like anything that's even remotely insensitive is considered an act of violence, or like traumatic or abusive or toxic. And I think the problem with expanding these concepts so much is that it tends to obscure, and it tends to people will overlook real cases of trauma and abuse. This is why it's important to say, well, what is abuse? Like, if you want to, for example, if a parent is saying, I'm not gonna financially subsidize a certain lifestyle of yours, is that considered abuse? Is that considered toxicity? Is that considered trauma? Versus if somebody is, like, constantly, being physically abusive, sexually abusive, or, like name calling, or things like that. Like, can we define what abuse is? Can we define what toxicity is? And can we make clear that people need to kind of at the same time develop a rough skin, and like learn how to deal with the ups and downs of life without equating every disappointment and every like maybe insensitive comment as like the same thing as being physically or psychologically actually abused, like something that would require people to actually come in and like really help you out. So that's kind of my opinion on that.
Ahsanti. I loved it, Samia. Ahsanti, Samia. Ahsanti, Samia. So here's another, I'm going to try to provoke Samia. Samia, so our parents, it's jumping into a different one. Our parents, let me take it over there. Are parents really taking advantage of their positions and going beyond their parenting boundaries to abuse?
I mean, I think in some cases, I think they do, but but we should look at the trends. Our parents now, are they a lot more abusive than they were 20, 30, 40 years ago? Like, are we implying that cases of abuse have increased, or has our definition of abuse increased?
Love the question. You just got to love that, girl. Keep going, Samia. I love it. Keep going.
I mean, I would say, like, we have to define what abuse is. And obviously, I think, like, just kind of from my own experience, I would say, like, parents, yeah, they do. Our community, we do give parents kind of like a green light when it comes to, their parenting practices. And there is this sentiment that, parents can do no harm because you always need to be obedient and respectful towards your parents. I think we need to figure out what the right balance is, and acknowledge the abuses, and on both sides, on the sides of the parents and on the sides of the children. And everybody needs to be responsible for their actions. We can't keep thinking that, like a 16 or 18-year-old is a child. I think, like, everybody's given their roles and their responsibilities, and this idea that we need to infantilize our children until they're 25, 26, 28 years old. I mean, that's creating a whole plethora of problems as well. So parents, yes, they need to take responsibility for their actions. They should not be abusive. They should, you know, they should take their role with seriously and realize that this is an amana. And at the same time, children should not be given a free pass to just do whatever they want. And if anybody stands in their way, then claim abuse and claim toxicity and all that stuff.
So let me ask you this. I know, Samia, I know you're a psychology major. Am I right?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so Samia, how is abuse defined in psychology?
I mean, I would refer that to one of the counselors. That was not my specialty. Somebody that's majored in counseling or family marriage therapy. They would define that in their own way.
Okay.
But even within the psychology community, there is acknowledgement that these concepts of abuse, of trauma, the definition has expanded within the last 10 years. Now you have students, for example, on college campuses, they want their safe spaces. Anything that is deemed, like challenges the worldview is deemed as a source of, like a source of discomfort. They don't want to deal with discomfort. This is a complaint about this newer generation, the Generation Z, that they're basically equating they just won't accept any sort of discomfort. This idea that they're so fragile, they basically need to be protected from any opposing worldviews, from anybody that challenges what they're doing. So I would, in terms of like the definition of abuse, I would ask you to refer to the counselors and psychologists on that.
Okay, let me take you to the other one. How influenced are the counselors with Western liberal definitions of parenting, abuse, and ethic and other ethical terms? Samuel, it's a question to you. How with psychology, let's say it that way. It doesn't have to be counselors and therapists, but when we speak about psychology, all right, the epistemology of psychology, how influenced can a Muslim that is specialized in psychology, how far can the Western and liberal definitions or even the different backgrounds affect a Muslim psychologist or affect the Muslims that are studying psychology? How far and how influential are these let's say philosophies affecting the Muslims that are actually going in those fields? Samia, the question is still for you.
Yeah, sorry, my son was crying. But I would say it's definitely very the kind of the liberal, the secular worldview is definitely very dominant in psychology, and the professors they will acknowledge that too. I remember having a professor, and he said that 95% of the American Psychological Association are atheists. A lot of the top tier, professors in these universities are atheists or agnostic or secular. There definitely has been a push to incorporate spirituality, as they would put it, spirituality and religious, like religious beliefs into the field of counseling. That's definitely been a push, because they realize that even though the like the professors and the trainees have been trained in a very secular field, but the population, if you're talking about American population, especially if you're talking about people that are over a certain age, they tend to be for the most part, religion is a big part of their life. They're more religious than other Western nations. So there has been this acknowledgement that the field of psychology, and especially the field of counseling and therapy, needs to incorporate more of a religious, spiritual like a spiritual approach to it, because it's shown to be very effective in terms of dealing with these mental health challenges, and it's very important. It's a very big part of the patient's life. But then, but you have this disconnect, because it's like the professional psychology class has been trained in a very secular way, but at the same time, they realize that the general population, spirituality and religion plays more of a role in their life. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that was great, Samia Habibti. That was great. That was great. And I'm gonna actually call on your sister Ronya because she put us a relevant article about the generation of youth and religious conviction. I would really like to hear, Ronya, if you can summarize that article for me, since I wasn't able to read it, and I would really like you to summarize and tell us what you think about that article. Ronya, unmute yourself. I know she's got kids so around, so she probably is not right now ready to actually speak up. Ronya, if you can unmute yourself. And also iPhone is telling us not all, but some of our religious leaders are not qualified or have background on field of psychology and therapy. So that's one opinion. I'd like whether Ronya or iPhone, go ahead. And I love the fact that Sheikha is also coming in. So we've got a Sheikha coming in. Ronya, what did you want to say?
Assalamu alaikum, Mrs.
Walaikum
Rania.
salam. Hayallah, Ronya.
So my son just woke up from his nap and he's crying.
That's
I'm so
okay. That's
sorry.
okay. I'm a mom.
Is it okay if I hop on in a few minutes, inshallah, once he's a little bit
Absolutely.
quieter,
Ronya,
and then we can
are
speak?
you're the host, Ronya.
Allah yajzik al-khair, shukran.
Habibat Albi. All right, so iPhone had a different idea to say. iPhone said not all, but some religious leaders are not qualified or have a background field of psychology and therapy. So go ahead. Samia also wanted to raise her hand again. Samia, you can unmute yourself whenever. It's okay. Go ahead. Not all, but some religious leaders. Samia, what did you want to say? You raised your hand again. So go ahead, Nadia. Here's Fatima telling us on YouTube. So when the child needs help with homework, their parents don't understand this new method, and it makes the child think their parent is ignorant. I was referring to trauma from the previous generation. Example, parents, grandparents, due to the Muslim community's recent arrival to the West. I agree we have to be careful about definitions and concepts. Fatima is telling us on YouTube. So I would really like to hear somebody else's. Where did Samia go? All right. So I love the points that Samia put forward, and she was basically telling us that a lot of the different terms, what used to be a term of abuse, or a term of abuse today, or what is a term of abuse today, is not, and it wasn't a term of abuse 20 years ago, and that right now it's becoming more expensive and more obscure, and many things are actually, with the microaggressions, many things are actually presented as if they are abuse. So indeed, we could actually always see these points, even as a chaplain in the university. A certain reaction or even a look sometimes might actually be considered a form of trauma, and it will sometimes be interpreted that you are doing body shaming, and or probably that person was not ready for this type of reaction, or they probably wanted the professor to change their score because it affected their psychology. And I would get a lot of girls actually calling me in order to speak on their behalf because their third cousin had actually passed away due to COVID, and they're affected psychologically, and expect that I would intervene between them and the professor, and actually tell the professor that they should give them a dismissal, that they should be dismissed from that particular test, because they're right now dealing with the trauma of having their third cousin actually dying. So are indeed, and the professors at many times on campus, professors are many times on campus are actually, I would say, not dismissing a lot of these, and the ones that really need it the most, they end up not getting those advantages because other people are abusing the let's just say those advantages, and then the one that really needs it the most actually gets lost and doesn't get it. So go ahead, Samia. Samia, you can unmute yourself whenever, Samia. Habibti Samia, go ahead. You had asked to unmute yourself, so go ahead, Samia.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, it's like there was a book that I read. It was called The Coddling of the American Mind. So it basically talks about how trends in parenting from the 90s, that basically children that were born and raised after like 1995, they noticed that like there's certain parenting trends that their parents, for example, they stopped having, like certain things that basically like now that these kids that, like raised in born in the mid 90s, now that they're adults, basically the byproduct of their parenting of, like basically you could say like their parents coddled them. They, spoiled them. They were, like they didn't want them to get hurt. They wouldn't let them, like if they would fall, they would like, oh, it's like, they wouldn't tell them, it's okay, get up, you'll be okay. Like they kind of like babied their kids. They coddled their kids. So they're saying that these kids that were basically born in the mid 90s, now that they're adults and they're graduated from college, and they're basically, they're working in the professional fields. Basically these kids, they're adults. They expect to be babied even as adults. So like at work, any like minor skirmishes with their coworkers, they take it to the human resources. If they, if there's, again, the thing about like comments, insensitive comments, they're like demanding people get fired. They want to cancel people. So it's like these basically like the byproduct of this coddling parenting, these parents that coddle their children, is it's affecting them as adults. Like they're basically like adults, but they're like grown babies. And what you said about what you're dealing with it, as a chaplain, there was an instance, I think it was like a month ago. It was a law professor at a university in California. He said he was basically under fire because his students, it was at the time of the George Floyd incident. He said that some of the white students in his class, they asked him to basically reduce the grade, or to give the African American students in the class to basically give them like the cutoff. So the cutoff for like passing, to reduce it for them because they are psychologically impacted by the events that were going on with George Floyd. So the professor, he didn't really know what to do. So he just asked them, should I also reduce the threshold for students that are from Minneapolis? Because I'm sure that it's a very sensitive situation, that's their hometown. And there was like a huge uproar, and there was demand for the professor to get fired. And so it's like these things that like 20 years ago, these were like non-issues. Like these weren't really issues. Like nowadays, it seems like things that are like, yeah, perhaps it's an insensitive comment, but now people are demanding that you get fired for an insensitive comment.
Well, yeah, this is actually an issue that I'm constantly dealing with, and many times, I have to be, as a chaplain, I have to be considerate over the youth. And sometimes when I would get a youth, she's crying and I'm starting to take pills, and I would say, well, what's going on? Oh, my mother, she's been gone for 2 weeks. Where she left to Somalia, and it's becoming too much on me. And she's already on antidepressants, etc. And, sometimes, as a chaplain, sometimes I'm trying to figure out where I don't want to dismiss their sentiments, and it really is different. My mother left me at the age of 15 with my brothers and sisters for a 1 whole year in Palestine, and I was doing everything, and I got a straight A student. I was a straight A student, but I felt that the students during our times, even when they are 25, mother leaving for 2 weeks, it's becoming too traumatic, and they can't handle it, and they're already on antidepressants, speaking of that. So sometimes I find it hard to, so if you would say something like, it's okay, you can be strong, etc., that they will misunderstand it, that you're trying to insinuate that they are somehow weak. So you got to be careful with what you're saying, because they will actually understand it, that you're telling them that they're weak, and that this kind of spiritual support and all that, they will misunderstand it, that somehow somehow you're not being mindful, and here's that word that it's constantly being used, that you're not being mindful of their feelings. So it's like, okay, am I supposed to say stay on your antidepressants for your mom leaving for 2 weeks? But subhanallah, it's making our job really harder, because the students in front of us many times are always holding up the trauma card and the anxiety card up in the air, where you're not really sure, how do I actually give you the spiritual and religious, or even the psychological support, when the realities in front of you are speaking for themselves, that hey, every time in life we will come across a certain challenge. The challenge, if we don't cross or even put an effort to go beyond the challenge, if every single challenge we choose to cancel it, that's going to be putting in our subconscious mind that every time you come across a challenge, just cancel it and you'll be safe. But some challenges, they're gonna come to you if you don't face it, but it's gonna come to you in a bigger form, and probably even more traumatizing when you don't even realize that it's coming to you. Same thing when we're talking about marriage. Not because your parents are telling you that this man is not the right person for you, when you're going to come across probably this marriage becoming a divorce, and with children, and with all this. Well, if you couldn't handle saying this is not the right marriage for you, are you going to be really strong enough to handle a divorce with children, with probably needing to get a job, with probably an autistic child, or probably a child with disability, in that whole in that whole in that whole problem? If you couldn't handle no, it's not a right choice for you, are you going to be able to handle something even more traumatizing? So just something to think about. Rania, go ahead. Rania is right there. Go ahead, Rania.
Okay, assalamu alaikum. So how are you, Aisha?
حبيبة قلبي, الله يرضى عنك يا رب.
Alhamdulillah. So the article that I sent actually was shared by some of my coworkers at Yaqeen, and it pretty much surveys the Gen Z generation, which are the individuals, I think, that were born between, let me check again, 1995 and 2010. And so what it says is that, just to summarize, that they're growing up in an age of mass information and high access to like different social causes and injustices and people's personal narratives within these different social movements. And so a lot of people are like, they're exposed to all of these microaggressions, as Sammy mentioned, where they feel like their individual liberties are being infringed upon. And so there's like a collective effort to safeguard and secure and preserve and to make sacred the self. So whatever the individual thinks is offensive or morally unacceptable or whatever, it's like there's a movement to preserve what they consider to be immoral and offensive. And so the article is saying that even those that affiliate with religion, they're finding that society is moving towards being all inclusive, like not just all inclusive, but kind of just like, protective. And again, it's like the coddling of the American mind. They're coddling what individuals want and what they feel is right or wrong. And so, and they find that religious institutions and religious leaders and religious parents are falling behind. It's like, why is it that my college campus is so accepting? Why is it that my social media followers are so accepting? My parents are not accepting. And so the disconnect between what they want and what they're experiencing in their homes is creating tension between the child and the parent. And it's making them have like this kirahiyya, this like hate and aversion towards religion. And they're saying that it's, even those that are part of religious institutions refuse to go to religious leaders during times of crisis because they feel like religious leaders aren't really with the times. They're kind of outdated, archaic. They don't quite get like what's so offensive or what's so abhorrent about what's going on in society. So someone had commented from my work group. They were saying that, religion is about knowing yourself and about restraining the parts of yourself that are harmful to you and to society, whereas our society is telling us to celebrate yourself and to make yourself and what you want to be the most sacred part of your living experience. I thought that was pretty interesting. The know thyself versus be thyself. It's like the idea of like having mujahada against your nafs, and like having patience towards people's harm towards you, and practicing forgiveness, practicing patience. It's like, our deen teaches us to be these things, but then, in society, on social media, with your friend group in your college campuses, it's the opposite. It's like, no, you be yourself at everyone else's expense and celebrate who you are, even if your parents don't agree. It's their problem, it's their fault, they're too archaic, their mindset is very outdated. So the clash is really about them, not about you.
So it takes us back to in philosophy, it's basically individualism.
Oh,
right?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Individualism versus in Islam, it's really disciplining yourself into a principle. So it's these two philosophies really at really standing out there, and also existentialism versus really finding and living the purpose that preceded our existence. So it takes us back to that postmodern philosophy that's always out there, and helping us figure out what's really happening. It's really the postmodern pressure, along with that.
Yeah.
That the different identities that it actually carries, whether it's individualism or existentialism, and in Islam, it's the totally different philosophy.
Yeah, and I would. Oh, yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Habibti Rania. I talk too much, so you go ahead.
You were still speaking. I was going to add that it kind of goes back also to the idea that like there is a principle of, like in Islam, of sacrificing for the collective, like staying with the jama'ah. And I feel like that's so important, at least for me, that like you think about your community, you think about your family, you think about your parents, about your relatives, and sometimes sacrificing for their sake out of respect. And I feel like these principles of sacrifice and respect and the collective are sort of pushed back in this individualistic society, where it's like we want people to cater to us and sacrifice for us. We won't sacrifice for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very good points, Rania Habibti. By the way, Rania and Samia are actually sisters, and you could see, mashallah, both very smart sisters, and they're both my cousins too. I'm very proud. Allah yahfadku ya Rabbi. Those were actually great comments. And Samia, when you raise your hand, Samia, khalas, that's it. I have no choice but to unmute. Go ahead, Samia. What else did you want to add, and Rania as well? Go ahead, Samia.
I was gonna say, Aisha, I don't know if there are any like counselors or therapists on the Zoom call, but was gonna say, like, in terms of, for example, the gender identity, what is from my understanding is that the training that therapists, counselors, psychologists have for any patient that is experiencing or questioning their gender identity, from my understanding is that the field's position is that the therapist, the counselor, the social worker, that they must affirm that identity. I don't know if there are any counselors or therapists that are on the call, but from my understanding is that if a patient comes to a counselor, a therapist, and tells them, I'm having doubts about my identity, I believe I was born a male, but I believe that I'm a female. From my understanding is that the training is that they have to affirm it. They can't question it. They can't. I don't even think they could report it to the parents. I've read some articles saying that teenagers, like young teens, 12, 13, 14, who have gone to social workers and questioned their identity, and even mentioned like, oh, I'm afraid of what my parents will say, that basically the teenager was taken from the parents. The parents weren't even allowed to take, like, they weren't even allowed to go back home to their parents. They were taken to like a shelter or to the social services. So I don't know if there's anybody that's on the call that could answer to that. But just from that perspective, like, imagine for a parent, not even know, like, if your child goes to somebody who's supposed to help them out, and they're putting them in that situation, like, that would be very scary, and would make a lot of
Samuel. Well, I've had a number of different cases. They actually came to me with the same exact scenario that you just had mentioned. I had a number of different parents where their children indeed they went, and it began with anxiety and trying to figure out anxiety, and a number of different parents were actually told that their child is dealing with gender dysphoria and that they needed treatment. This is what they were told. And indeed, the children were actually put, like you said, in a shelter. There were some parents where the child did stay with the parent on a condition that would actually sign that they would embrace their treatment in taking the injections. And if they did not embrace that, if they did not accept that, or they would go against them, that they would lose the custody of their child. Imagine, this is real. This is actually real. And I've had a number of different parents, actually, not parents, but a number of different counselors that actually told me and wanted to seek a fatwa whether they can actually practice, and especially in California, that was a big deal. Had a number of different phone calls from California where they were trying to, of course, practice the therapy, but they were not allowed whatsoever to speak against or even tell those clients that this is not acceptable in Islam or anything like that, and they just had to be neutral about it, and that if they didn't want to practice that in that way, that they might actually lose their license. So they were really worried about that. California was probably the most state where I had situations where counselors would actually talk to me and actually ask me the fatwa on that. So this is actually a real thing. If California has gone that far, in Minnesota, we don't have that many counselors. I don't know how the counselors in Minnesota dealt with the issue. I've had two counselors, I believe, that told me that they just didn't take the case because they didn't want to lose their license. One, two, they didn't want to do something haram. So that was just their way. They just ran away from this. But can they always do that? And what does that mean if you're a Muslim counselor, all right, and you have a case, and of course if you don't take this case, the non-Muslim is going to take this case, and they're going to back up this so-called gender dysphoria, and then we're losing our children to that as well. But at the same time, they're not allowed to give them that counseling in where, no, you are not going through gender dysphoria. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you this way, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you the best blessing, instead of looking at, yeah, well, what if I want to embrace a new gender? Why don't I embrace what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given me? So they're not allowed to say it that way. Go ahead, Samia, you still want to add something? Samia or Rania, go ahead, both of you. I'm loving these girls, not because they're my cousins, but also because they're
So I was going to actually share a story. One of my friends is a family and marriage counselor, and she was saying how a Muslim family approached her with their underage son, I believe, and he was undergoing gender dysphoria and wanted to transition into being a female. And they came to her with the hopes that, like, because she's Muslim as well, she could help guide their son back to be more practicing, back to praying, because he had abandoned his prayers. And she had to make it clear, like, I'm working for a state institution. I cannot impose any religious values on your child, but I can guide them in a way that that helps them kind of find themselves again in their religious orientation. And then so she was saying how for many, many months during her counseling with this individual, that this person had stopped praying, had started hanging out with like the LGBTQI community, had started to form like all these alliances with them and join their different social groups and gatherings. And he kind of went down this very bad downhill path. And she was saying that, like, while she was counseling him, she was having nightmares every single day because she felt like she was helpless. working at a secular institution. But then she was saying how, alhamdulillah, eventually, after many months of counseling, he had improved. I think he began praying again. But that's kind of the struggle for many Muslim counselors in secular institutions, is that they can't impose any religious values on their client. It's strictly, based on the individual's goals and what they want to accomplish. So I'm sure it's very hard. I mean, may Allah make it easy for all the counselors who are trying to make an impact in these spaces. But I think having a private practice as a Muslim is probably a lot more ideal for helping the youth that are struggling.
Love that. Love that last thing that you said. Yep, having, your own, and definitely in order to have those clinics or those institutions, we definitely need that space that is funded by the Muslim community in order to give those counselors the space to practice based on Islam and to actually use the different Western tools that were actually proven to be successful in many ways. So it's kind of like, that the tool, and at the same time getting that backup and getting the Muslim tool as well. So to have those both tools is definitely, inshallah, something that the Muslim community would be better educated. Sorry, my kids are playing with the car in the background.
Yeah.
Where they would make use of both, so that Muslim and the non-Muslim tools, in order to create safer spaces for the therapists, where they would not be afraid for their job if they would practice based on Islam, and at the same time also get fair pay to help them do the job that they need to do in order to help the Muslim community. So we definitely need that. But I think the Muslim community has to have better awareness on why it's important. So just as we would get masajid, we also need those areas to be funded and to be spaces where it can help the Muslim community and help the Muslim youth. So that was a very important point, Rania. Allah barik fiki. All right, everyone, if anybody else would like to add one last thing before we log off, Allah barik fiku. That was great. Samia, Rania, you guys were excellent. And Allah barik fiku. MashaAllah, two great sisters, beacons in the community. Allah yahfadhku ya Rabbi, and jazakumullah khairan, everyone. And barakallahu fikum. I see Kaltoon, but she didn't want to unmute herself. I guess she's busy with something. So we'll see you all inshallah tomorrow for our tafsir class. Jazakumullah khairan, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Yes, there is a recording. We actually have it on YouTube. So for those that are asking if there's a recording. Oh, we didn't actually read the poll. Wait up. How did the poll go? The poll was definitely going very influenced. Considered the counselors are very influenced. And the poll didn't want to even go up. Okay, so here are counselors, therapists really qualified to advise the Muslim community. No one said yes, they all said depends. All right, so jazakumullah khairan, everyone, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.